When we speak about the final test, we're not talking about a dramatic argument or a single cruel act. The final test is far more subtle and far more dangerous. It begins the moment a narcissistic woman senses that her influence over you is weakening. At that point, she no longer seeks connection, she seeks confirmation of dominancy. The question she is asking, often unconsciously, is simple: will you abandon yourself to keep me? This is where the pressure intensifies. Your boundaries are challenged, not directly, but through guilt, emotional withdrawal, confusion, and contradiction. One day you are idealized, the next you are dismissed. This instability is deliberate. From a psychological perspective, it destabilizes your sense of self, making you more suggestible. Carl Jung would describe this as an attack on the ego's coherence, an attempt to fragment your inner center so it can be externally controlled. Passing this test does not require confrontation. In fact, confrontation often fails. Passing means you refuse to sacrifice your values for approval. You stop explaining your intentions to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop negotiating your worth. And most importantly, you stop seeking validation from the very source that thrives on withholding it. At this stage, the narcissistic dynamic reveals its true nature. Love was never the currency, compliance was. When you no longer bend, the illusion collapses. What remains is discomfort, withdrawal, and eventually hostility, because your autonomy exposes the emptiness of her control. Here is the truth most people miss. The final test is not about her choosing you. It is about you choosing yourself without needing permission. And the moment you do that, the cycle ends, whether she accepts it or not. What often confuses people at this stage is that healing looks, from the outside, like indifference. You didn't announce your withdrawal. You didn't threaten, explain, or demand change. You simply became quieter, more distant, emotionally unavailable to chaos. And this, paradoxically, is what triggers the deepest reaction. Because a narcissistic woman does not fear anger, she fears non-engagement. From a psychological standpoint, silence is destabilizing when someone depends on emotional feedback to regulate their sense of power. Your reactions once served as a mirror. They confirmed importance, control, relevance. When that mirror goes dark, anxiety emerges. Carl Jung would say that what you are witnessing is the panic of a persona losing its audience. Without your emotional responses, her constructed self has nothing to reflect against. Distance, then, becomes intolerable, not because she misses you, but because she can no longer locate herself through you. This is why coldness provokes escalation, provocations, contradictions, sudden vulnerability, even cruelty. These are attempts to re-enter your emotional field, to make you feel something, anything. Because as long as you feel, she exists in relation to you. What you may not realize is that your calm withdrawal is not passive. It is an assertion of psychological independence. You are no longer volunteering your nervous system as a battlefield. You are no longer trying to be understood by someone invested in distortion. In Jungian terms, this is individuation beginning to take hold, the self separating from the complex that once dominated it. And here is the crucial insight: silence is not avoidance when it comes from clarity. Distance is not cruelty when it protects your integrity. Emotional stillness is not weakness when it is chosen consciously. If you want something to carry with you, let it be this: the moment you stop feeding what drains you, you discover how much strength you had all along. After silence and distance fail to pull you back into orbit, something more aggressive often appears. The story changes. Suddenly, you are no longer simply distant or misunderstood. You are recast as cold, selfish, unstable, or even cruel. This is what many people experience as the smear campaign, and it can be deeply unsettling if you don't understand its function. Psychologically, it is not about truth. It is about damage control. When a narcissistic woman loses access to you, she also loses the ability to regulate her self-image through your reactions. Carl Jung would describe this as the ego defending itself against the collapse of a carefully constructed persona. To prevent internal disintegration, responsibility must be projected outward. You become the container for everything she cannot tolerate within herself. Your character is rewritten so her narrative can survive. What makes this phase particularly painful is the injustice of it. You are attacked for the very boundaries that restored your sanity. You are misunderstood by people who never saw the private dynamic, and the natural impulse is to explain, defend, or expose. But notice the trap: engagement keeps the bond alive. Defense feeds the illusion that her version of events deserves your energy. Here is the paradox most people miss. Smear campaigns are not launched against those who are weak. They are launched against those who escaped. If you were still compliant, there would be no need to discredit you. Your departure threatens the internal myth that control equals worth. So the story must be poisoned before others, and before she herself can see the truth. From a Jungian lens, this is projection at its purest. What is disowned internally is attacked externally. The more peaceful you become, the more agitated the narrative may grow. Remember this: when doubt creeps in, being misunderstood is often the price of psychological freedom. And the moment you stop trying to correct the lie, you step fully out of its reach. There comes a moment that feels almost anticlimactic. There is no dramatic apology, no final argument, no satisfying resolution. What changes instead is internal. Her words land differently, or not at all. The familiar spikes of guilt, hope, fear, or urgency simply fail to appear. This is emotional detachment, and psychologically speaking, it is the point of no return. Up to this stage, the bond survives on affect. Strong emotion, whether pain or longing, keeps the connection alive. A narcissistic dynamic feeds on this intensity. Carl Jung would say the relationship is sustained by a complex, an emotionally charged knot that hijacks attention and behavior. Detachment dissolves that charge. The complex loses energy. And when that happens, the structure collapses on its own. This is why detachment feels strange. You may still remember the past clearly, but it no longer controls you. You can observe without being pulled in. You hear accusations without the impulse to defend. You sense provocation without the urge to react. This is not numbness. It is clarity. The psyche has re-centered itself. For the narcissistic woman, this is intolerable, not because she has lost love, but because she has lost access. She can no longer reach you through emotion. Without emotional leverage, manipulation has nowhere to attach. The dynamic becomes unsustainable. Control requires participation, and detachment quietly withdraws consent. What matters most here is restraint. Detachment does not need explanation. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It simply is. Jung viewed this as a movement toward individuation. The self no longer defined by external approval or opposition. And here is the essential truth to carry forward. When you stop being emotionally available to what harms you, you don't lose connection. You regain yourself. And once the self is reclaimed, nothing outside of it holds power anymore. What happens next is often misunderstood because it doesn't look like victory in the conventional sense. There is no confrontation, no dramatic reversal of roles, no public reckoning. Instead, something quieter and far more unsettling takes place. You begin to grow, not performatively, not to prove a point, but organically. Your energy returns, your thinking clears. Your life starts to expand in directions that have nothing to do with her. And this is what lingers. A narcissistic personality is not wounded by anger or revenge. Those still confirm relevance. What unsettles her is irrelevance paired with elevation. Carl Jung observed that the shadow is most disturbed not when it is attacked, but when it is left behind. Your growth functions as a mirror she cannot control. It reflects what she lacks the capacity to build: inner stability, purpose, and continuity of self. This is why your progress must be quiet. When growth is authentic, it does not announce itself. You don't explain how well you're doing. You don't showcase happiness to provoke envy. You simply live differently. And in that difference, the old dynamic dissolves completely. There is no role left for her to play in your psyche. What's important here is intention. Growth as revenge keeps you psychologically entangled. Growth as alignment frees you. Jung would call this the restoration of the self's natural trajectory. The psyche moving forward once the obstructing complex loses dominance. You are no longer reacting. You are creating. And this is the deeper irony. The very thing she tried to suppress, your confidence, independence, and inner authority, becomes the force that ends her influence entirely. Not because she sees it, but because you no longer need her toe. Take this with you when your life becomes fuller, quieter, and more grounded without explanation. That is not just healing, it is liberation. And nothing unsettles control more than a person who no longer seeks permission to become whole. By the time you reach this stage, something fundamental has already shifted. You are no longer searching for signs, explanations, or reassurance. In fact, the very need to understand her has been replaced by a deeper understanding of yourself. This is why this message resonates with you now. It doesn't reach everyone. It reaches those who are no longer emotionally accessible to manipulation. From a Jungian perspective, this is what happens when a person moves beyond the identification with a complex. Earlier, the relationship occupied the center of your psychological life. Your thoughts, reactions, and even your sense of meaning were organized around it. But now, that center has relocated inward. The self is no longer outsourced. You are no longer programmable through guilt, fear, or intermittent validation. This is also why there is no urge to return, no curiosity about what she thinks, no need for closure. Closure is a concept for those still seeking permission to move on. You don't need permission. You have already crossed the threshold. The narcissistic dynamic requires access to your emotional system to survive, and that access is gone. What replaces it is discernment. You notice patterns quickly. You feel discomfort earlier. You respond slower and with intention. This isn't hypervigilance. It's wisdom earned through experience. Jung would describe this as the integration of shadow and awareness, where painful knowledge becomes conscious strength rather than unconscious repetition. And perhaps most importantly, you no longer need to warn others loudly or prove anything publicly. Your presence itself has changed. Your boundaries are implicit. Your silence is deliberate. Your life is self-directed. Here is the final truth to sit with. When you are no longer accessible to what once controlled you, you don't just escape a person, you exit an entire cycle. And once a cycle is broken consciously, it does not repeat.